So, welcome to the Pagabo Live Pavilion. For those of you who haven't been in before, for those who are coming in for the second time, welcome back. My name's Tom. I'm the host of the Pagabo Live Knowledge Initiative, which combines webinars, online content and in-person events such as this. Today we have brought together a brilliant panel to explore how local authorities, developers and contractors can adopt procurement policies that promote sustainability throughout the life cycle of a project. So what are those best practices for low carbon materials, integrating renewable energy solutions and innovative construction techniques that reduce waste and environmental impact? Well, hopefully the panel today will tell you. So we're going to start with some introductions. So it'd be quite good if you guys could introduce yourselves. We'll start with Simon, but if you could introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do and the projects you're working on currently.
Thank you. So good morning. I'm Simon Pope. I'm the Transport Capital Programme Director for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority here in Leeds. I'm responsible for delivery of our £2.5 billion capital programme across the transport network, which includes everything from new bus and rail stations, public transport corridors, active travel schemes, zero-emission buses, and the list goes on. I also work very closely with my colleague in the audience who's responsible for delivering phase one of our new tram network that's going to connect Leeds and Bradford. All of our investment in transport is effectively underpinning our local growth plan, which is a £7 billion plan to try and close our economic productivity gap with the UK average. And underpinning all of that is our ambitions to achieve a net zero region by 2038. So we're trying to embed that in everything we do, including in procurement. Just for those that don't know, so the Combined Authority acts both as a scheme promoter in its own right, delivering its own projects. We also act as funder, supporting our 5 local authorities in West Yorkshire, so Leeds, Bradford, Calderdale, Kirklees and Wakefield, to deliver schemes on our behalf.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. We'll go along the line and go to you next, Sue.
Great. So I'm Snee McElroy. I'm the Commercial Director for East West Rail. So new rail line connecting Oxford, Cambridge, Milton Keynes, Bedford in between. So those, in that area, all of those towns contribute over £111 billion per year to the UK economy. But that is constrained. And so East West Rail is an enabler project as part of a far broader regional plan to unlock growth. And I think that's the thing that we have to remember, is that it's hard to build a railway on time, on budget, safely, but it's not about the railway on its own. The railway is an enabler to connect that corridor to unlock growth. And so how we do that, how we think about the procurement, how we put together our contracts, our vision, how we flow that down, is so important that we remember that this is about the regional unlocking of growth, which means that we need people to want to live there, places to live, affordable housing, connections, and all of the other aspects that you want from a place that you live and work. And so those are the things that's really important that we think about as we structure our approach.
Yeah, we'll get onto those growth topics shortly. Over to you, Jas, for your introduction.
Hello everyone, I'm Jas Welch, Head of Sourcing for the TRU programme. So the Trans-Pennine Route upgrade, it's a 11.5 billion upgrade programme, and we've already awarded 7.3 billion of that, so we're very much in delivery phase at the moment. The programme itself spans a 70-mile portion of track, and we've got, across that, we've got something like, let me check, let's see, so 23 stations, 29 level crossings, 6 miles of tunnels and 3 miles of viaducts. So we're very much operating across a live environment, and that in itself, something the size and scale of what we do, brings all sorts of challenges but all sorts of opportunities as well. So we operate on an enterprise business model, so we have partners with alliances in the east and the west, and they're helping us deliver the change that we want to see for the network. Our main goal is obviously to deliver greener, more efficient trains, increase capacity on the network to improve that corridor in the north and bring more economic growth. So we've got a real focus on that, but beyond that, we've got a legacy goal of making sure we leave real sustainable social value behind as well. And that's definitely something that's built into how we structure our procurement events and how we engage with our supply chain as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. Obviously, you're all now in the process of undertaking major infrastructure projects. So what are some of the innovations that you're seeing, and what are some of them that you'd like to see as part of your project? Jas, we'll go to you on this one first.
So I think in terms of... gone up a bit. So I think in terms of innovations that we're seeing, it's more about how we are structuring our procurement events and how we engage with our supply chain as well, and really stress testing what those requirements look like. That early engagement means that we're able to really refine our understanding to get the best value. But innovation-wise, we've really thought outside the box to meet our carbon targets. So we've started to utilise battery operated tools. We've started to utilise equipment which isn't necessarily reliant on diesel and other things which are carbon intensive. Really, we're trying to engage with our supply chain in a way where we're able to undertake the work that we need to do, but also harness the efficiencies of what our partners are doing as well. So we're doing lots of things with MPR and a few others. So that's probably what we're getting in innovation. But what I would say is the size and scale of what we do means that those innovations might be small but mighty, I suppose, is what I wanted to say.
Simon, yours are across a range of projects. So what are some of those kind of key innovations that you're bringing in West Yorkshire?
I suppose we're take a step back a moment. We're really challenging ourselves about how can we instigate innovation from our supply chain. So I think for us to do that, we need to think about how we're actually embedding carbon into all of our decision making, not just as part of the procurement process, which means we really need to challenge ourselves about how we elevate carbon so it sits alongside cost, risk and programme for the basis of the decisions that we take. I think some of the best innovations I've seen is where the supply chain really comes together to develop solutions right across all stages of the project lifecycle, drawing on the skills that exist from the different partners that we work with. Essentially to try and avoid either reinventing the wheel or, in the worst cases, potentially value engineering out some of the novel solutions we're trying to instigate. I think there's some real lessons the industry can learn here from how the safety culture has been embedded into the industry as a whole. Ultimately, I think innovation that's most effective is where some of the co-benefits of that innovation are teased out. So you're not just thinking about the carbon benefits, but you're also thinking about some of the whole life cost benefits of some of those solutions, really following the PAS 2080 principles for those that are familiar with the terminology. And I think, ultimately we're open to learn. So I think a lot of the innovation does sit with our supply chain partners, and we're trying to formulate our procurement processes to encourage them to share that with us and invest here.
Does that echo with what you're experiencing, so?
Yeah, I think when you really step back, some of this is about thinking about what your role is as a client, and it's quite easy to start speccing how you think things should be done or where you think it's been done great elsewhere. And actually, I suppose our role is to really think about what we're trying to achieve, try and be really clear about those outputs. And actually leave the space for innovation. For a project like us, as a many projects, a portfolio that all needs to integrate, actually it's far more important that we understand the interfaces, the technical interfaces, and the constraints that will bring that overall as a programme, and that then we're able to clearly articulate the outcomes that we are trying to achieve, so that actually the innovation and the option sits with others. Because even though we think we've seen a cutting edge thing somewhere, it may not be the right thing for our project, and with the acceleration of technology and the acceleration of innovation, we're not even really best placed to sort of specify that. So I think the approach that we're really looking at is, these are our challenges. This is what we're trying to achieve. How do you think we should be doing this? And embedding that in the process around how we choose organisations, and far more about sort of the expertise, the capability, the approach, the collaboration, the skills, and that are brought, but trying not to sort of over-define. I think that's the challenge that we have really. But our role, as client, is making sure that it's the outcome and the benefits that we're trying to achieve is really understood, especially where there are now in such complexity, so many trade-offs to consider.
You mentioned the C word, collaboration. Yes. I did a little bit of research in the programme of UKREiiF this week, and it turns out that collaboration is mentioned 73 times in the names of panels and in the synopses. So clearly it's a topic that's going across UKREiiF this week and across the industry. Jas, are there any examples from your projects of where supply chain collaboration has been really successful?
So
certainly working with the alliances has given us that breadth of experience and innovation. But I think what's also been quite interesting, because when we talk about innovation, you just assume that naturally it's accepted and people see the value straight away. But actually, one of the challenges we have is addressing people's mindsets around the value that we're delivering. Sometimes that does mean that there's an initial cost, it's much higher than what was expected, and getting them to understand that the longer term value. But really the innovation has come from us challenging ourselves and the supply chain about the traditional ways of engaging. And also sometimes there is an element of, I'm not quite taking a leap of faith, because obviously we have these things measured and there's checks and balances, but certainly being a bit bolder about things. So it's been beneficial for us, but that education piece is something we've had to do both internally with supply chain, and obviously we're accountable to the DFT and others as well. So that transparency is key.
Well, there's a lot of focus on housing and development, and with ambitious targets there. We'll have all heard the 1.5 million homes mentioned at least twice this week already. But how can infrastructure support and help that design for place, purpose and community? So Simon, we'll go to you on this one first, if that's okay.
I think this is perhaps where contextualisation is important. So, you know, what does good look like? What are the outcomes we're actually trying to realise from that investment? I think sometimes, you know, that can be quite challenging. So our new tram network in West Yorkshire, for example, is going to be a transformative programme that's going to really change our growth potential in the region. Trying to understand the in-combination effects of that with other policy measures to understand what carbon is proportionate to spend on the construction of that project is a challenge. Ultimately, the benefits that we will see on the back of that level of investment is much more sustainably oriented development that will reduce carbon emissions the longer term across the region. But we need to ensure that we're still incentivising supply chain to achieve the low carbon outcomes that we want in the construction of that in the first place. So I think, you know, echoing Sue's points really, that, you know, we need to encourage that investment in innovation, but without being too prescriptive in doing so. But open our suppliers' minds to, you know, what we're actually seeking to achieve in the round. So it's not just a transport project, and it's not just about low carbon materials. You know, some of the co-benefits that come from adopting low carbon approaches can provide real benefits around place and community. So thinking around, you know, the placemaking ambitions we're seeking to realise, the climate resilience benefits we're seeking to realise, that can really incentivise more innovative approaches to things like green blue infrastructure, for example. So I think, you know, being clear about what those outcomes are and ultimately involving the communities that we're seeking to serve as part of that, so that there's a sense of ownership in terms of the solutions that get developed.
So it's about making sustainable placemaking as a procurement output, isn't it, rather than it being just a bolt-on.
Yeah, I think again, this is how we put together the commercial arrangements are just so important, because, you know, as an industry, we are the challenges around kind of, you know, designers will continue to produce a specific design for something, and, you know, contractors will take design and will continue to sort of look and to change that design. And in the end, we've really got to restructure how those organisations come together and are rewarded for an outcome that that benefits the project. And I think that is, that's not easy to do. But really, we're trying to, build with less, spend less, use less materials, but also make sure that organisations get fair rewards, profits for doing those kind of things. And actually, that's where the commercial element of actually really achieving these sustainable strategies is actually the most important aspect, or it just can incentivise the wrong things. So we're doing a lot of market engagement at the moment on East West Rail, and we've started that from a point of, we're not buying this. This is our whole commercial strategy. This is how it comes together as a whole. Do you think this arrangement with a designer or with a contractor, or splitting in this way, or understanding these interfaces, will drive that outcome which we're trying to achieve? clearly we're doing lots of engagement with local authorities, local plans. What are they looking for in their region? How does that unlock the growth? Because again, the capital cost to the railway is an aspect, but the railway will be there for a very long time, as we know, and always longer than you think. And if you don't put it in the right place for the right level of passengers, in the right way, in the right environment, you won't actually get the benefits you're looking to achieve from an enabler project like this.
And it's about seeing sort of the projects and evaluating it beyond that lens of just carbon, isn't it? And that being the limit of sustainability is just carbon emissions. It's seeing sustainability as a more of an ongoing and forward-looking thing.
Yeah, and not just about the build. Yeah. And that is some of the challenges now. Is it's still really hard to know. Do you buy that glass bottle? Do you buy the plastic bottle of ketchup? Do you buy the life cycle of different products? Where that means, how that transports through the world, the transparency, how that impacts sort of other elements of sort of social value and transparency of the supply chain and slavery and all of those other aspects. It's a really complex infrastructure now that we have to think about to get the right outcome and trade-offs. And I think, obviously now the standards are starting to evolve that helps you to test some of that. But that is the role of that's the really important role of the client, is making sure that they understand those dynamics, or they recognise that they don't understand them as an incomplete client, but they do have to put those rules of engagement together.
Jas, I saw you were nodding along there. Does that echo with your experience?
No, absolutely. I think the bit that I was really chiming in on was the social value aspect, because for the TRU programme, obviously we're delivering major infrastructure changes. We're improving the railway network, but equally so, the legacy is around social value. That's a real focus of ours. So some of the things that we're doing in TRU around that is, first of all, we've got a real focus on involving the local communities and being part of TRU. So some stats say we've got 60% of our workforce is actually within 25 miles of the route, and 80% of the workforce is within 40 miles of the route. So that's, we are making sure that the communities that we're serving are being part of that change as well. We've also, on the social value piece, we've got a rail social value tool that we've created, and we've done that in conjunction with the RSSB. And it's an independent measure of the social value opportunities that we've got, and we use that to assess that. And we're actually engaging with the DfT at the moment to make that a rail industry standard. So I guess it's one of those things where with the TRU programme, that social value element has become more and more important to us, and then creating something that's real and tangible to change the rail industry as a whole has kind of come out of that.
That's really nicely segued onto something that Simon mentioned about what good looks like and how that's measured. So from your perspective, Simon, what are the main sort of tools, measurement standards and the parameters that you guys are working towards? What are people looking for you on that front?
So I suppose in terms of supply chain partners, things like PAS 2080 accreditation is really useful for us because it demonstrates a degree of capability amongst those supply chain partners that we can build from. Then I think we're challenging ourselves to come up with more meaningful KPIs as part of how we then manage those contracts in delivery to ensure that we're actually achieving the carbon outcomes we're aspiring to. Completely echo the points around social value and how significant that can be as part of the procurement process, particularly when you think some of the carbon outcomes are often the highest value parts of that social value offer. I think the other unique opportunity perhaps we have where we're working across a number of different partners in region is our ability to kind of scale our approach to reduce risk. So delivering a capital programme of our scale that hopefully it gives an opportunity to de-risk innovation and really, I suppose, tackle common hotspots in design that we see across our capital programme, across all different partners that they might not have the ability to do so if they were pursuing opportunities in isolation. One thing I would say is that, we perhaps need to be willing to not always get everything right. If we are trying to innovate and set standards of what we want to achieve, then sometimes, we will have a willingness to fail in some instances, but it's how we can learn from that and leave the opportunities that the programme provides to kind of build upon on those findings.
So in terms of this measurement and standards that you guys are working towards, what is it that you look for?
So I think we're going back to sort of challenge kind of what projects get government investment, and actually looking at kind of the Green Book and how are they assessed and how are projects assessed, so that we actually get the investments in the right places. And actually, East West Rail, you look at it, it as a it doesn't solve there's no capacity problem today. That's not the problem. So therefore, and in sort of normal rail projects, that wouldn't be the type of thing that gets investment by government, by the sort of old rules of the game. So actually, I think we're trying to step up to kind of challenge the strategic case, really, around how do you decide what gets public sector investment, and then also looking at how we measure the return on that investment in a much broader aspect. I think, as a role or as an arm's length body, as public money, as your money and your taxes, there's also a role of government and those arm's length bodies to make sure that people are looking at different aspects to develop. So obviously, LTC's done a huge amount in terms of its procurement, carbon, hydrogen, but there's no point in every project trying to pathfind the same things. So we're trying to, we're working really hard to stay joined up, be clear about kind of who's working in different areas, be fast adopters of the great stuff that Network Rail are doing in pockets, and make sure that we're using that as our starting point, rather than sort of dreaming up new initiatives. So I think our aim in legacy, of course, is to deliver for the region, but also challenge that sort of wider investment in the tools and the returns, and how those measures are considered as part of government. Yeah.
And Jas, as Simon mentioned, the de-risking element there in the supply chain, and the R&D aspect of that, and how procurement frameworks can kind of help and fund innovation and sort of engender that. So procurement can be a real catalyst for that, can't it?
Absolutely. I think we lean quite heavily into our supply chain to understand what the challenges and opportunities that they're experiencing, and that kind of feeds into when we are structuring our procurement events and when we're looking at our commercial models and things. We are looking for ways where that risk isn't necessarily just held upon them, but that it's shared in some way. But when you're doing that, especially when it's taxpayers funded, and we have to have that level of transparency, we have to be very careful about the checks and balances that we put in place, that are able to evidence the position, if that makes sense. Because it's one thing for us to tell you all how it's going, and it's another thing to have something, perhaps an independent review of how things are going. And I guess moving on to that just a little bit, one of the things that we do for our sustainability is that we don't just assess ourselves as doing really well in that. We use the BREEAM mechanism. It's an independent sustainability measure, and our goal is to be excellent. And we've actually been successful in achieving that twice now, first with our W1 project, and with our lead station capacity project. So the transparency bit is really key, because when we're going to our supply chains and we're saying, this is what we want to achieve, this is the long-lasting change, it's beneficial for you, it's beneficial for us, it's beneficial for the local economies, we have to be really honest about our equal accountabilities in that space and our vulnerabilities. And I think you have to have a really robust relationship to get to that space in terms of conversations. And we've done really great work in that way. So it's definitely something that I think the TRU programme will leave as a legacy into the supply chain as well, and how we engage.
Yeah, there's been a lot of this week. You'll see a lot of this versus that questions coming in the discussions, and with that around procurement, social value, sustainability. In terms of it being public money, and we'll go to you on this one first, Simon, where is that balance between sustainability and lowest cost on the procurement side for you guys?
There's no silver bullet, is there? I think it's getting that balance right. I think there is a bit of a cultural shift going on at the moment. Sustainability, decarbonisation outcomes are now starting to be considered alongside the traditional cost risk programme basis for how we're rewarding contracts. I think for us to really capitalise on that shift, it's making sure that we as clients are honest and open about perhaps some of the skills gaps we've got to making that happen. And I suppose being a bit more consistent across all sort of public sector client organisations about what our expectations are. So that gives that ability and confidence for supply chain to invest in this space, because consistent ask across all the procurement activities that they're undertaking. also think we perhaps need to get a little bit better about selling the benefits, because not everyone is plugged into the carbon agenda in the same way, but actually a lot of the low carbon outcomes we're seeking to realise achieve wider other benefits alongside around cost savings, etc. potentially if we get things right. So it's making sure that we capitalise on those things and talk the right language effectively.
So are we on the brink of a cultural shift? If we aren't, should we be?
I think there's two aspects to this. There's value for money, and there's what is your definition of value on a project? What are the benefits? And then there's the tension with affordability, and I think we always have to think about both of those things, and as usual with infrastructure projects, I think that is the real, what are we trying to achieve at the front end is just the fundamental, because you may be able to achieve that. A writing utensil might be a pencil or a Mont Blanc, and I think that's also the balance we've got to think about, is what you're really trying to get out of the project, and where does your spend provide that value. And I think for us, it's unlocking growth, it's communities, it's will people want to live there, therefore do you get the benefit, and therefore how does that drive the social value aspects, the sustainability drivers, the reducing the cost of the railway for maintenance in the future, trying to keep passenger costs and services down because the maintenance costs are lower. So I think those are the things that we've got to focus on and make sure we've got really sharp focus on. And it's that's the value of the profession, the judgment that you have, the challenge we have in the industry of skills shortage, because you need those people at the front end of projects to really think about not just the social value initiative, but for this project, where does the investment unlock the value? And I do think there is a shift in the industry on that. I do think there is more and more sort of social value toolkits, etc., to really try and force that upfront thinking. But it's a cultural piece that we shouldn't be starting projects until we're really clear what we're trying to achieve, and it's a discipline that we almost all have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And if we don't have that clarity for whatever our role is in that process, we have to have the kind of discipline and integrity to say, you're not ready to start.
Jas, how does that value conversation go for you? Is it an easy one or a hard one?
So I think, easy. I wouldn't say necessarily easy, but what I would say is that cultural shift is definitely something that's happened in Network Rail as a whole. So before the Procurement Act changed the MEAT to MAT, so most economical advantageous tender to most advantageous tender, that was something that we were looking at a couple of years prior to that anyway. And I think that focus on taking the economical bit out tells you that the lowest price isn't what we're looking for here. We're looking for that long-term value. So much like Sue alluded to, it's that whole life cost understanding of what the requirement is, and also not only just understanding that element, but really challenging that. And some of the things that I mentioned that we've done in TRU about the additional value that we're bringing. One of the things you mentioned was around the skills. So we have partnered with the NSAR, National Skills Academy for Rail, to really introduce some new innovation around how we engage them and how we fill that skills gap, because we want to be able to benefit the railway going forward as well. So all of those elements feed into the mix, and we engage with our supply chain on that too. But that's all come from that move from that most economical advantageous tender to the most advantageous tender piece. So I think the thinking is well established, and also in Network Rail, when we have our ITTs, we've got a solid 10% in that technical, which is health and safety, and a solid 10% which is social value as well, and that's a mandatory requirement, so that's always in there. So just in the way that we set up our procurement events and add that technical scoring there, it tells the supply chain this is something that we really value, and I think it shouldn't be underestimated from the size of your organisation, the influence that you can have on the supply chain as well. So that's all something that's part of that mix.
Brilliant. We've got 29 minutes and 43 seconds in before we've got to mention the Procurement Act, which I think might be a Pagabo live record. So We're going to go to a few audience questions in a moment, so have a little think if you do want some, but just a couple to kind of bring the session towards a little bit of a conclusion for everyone here. We'll go along the line here, starting with you, Simon. How do we ensure that the lessons of today's projects become tomorrow's best practice? How can we make sure that's embedded going forward?
I think there's obvious things around sustainability outcomes being mandated and elevated, like we've seen with social value more generally. But I think for me, the key is to build consideration into our governance process so that we're consistent and we're regardless of the type of project, the scale of project, the sector that the project's delivered in. It's a consistent requirement that sustainability outcomes are a fundamental part of the decision making at all stages of the project lifecycle. I think as well, partnership is probably key, or a collaboration. You mentioned it earlier. Fundamentally, we're trying to tackle climate change here. It's a global challenge that needs a concerted effort across everyone. And if you look at our supply chain and the values of those organisations, they're typically very closely aligned with our own. So it's how can we kind of secure that shared ownership of those outcomes, because I think that's what is going to make the biggest effect.
And Sue, your same question to you.
The challenge is everyone has a lessons learned, and everyone's view of why that project went wrong or why it was spectacular is different. We're in a world now where there is just so much data, there's so much information, and there's so many sources to draw from that I think some of it is sifting it to use the right things and be informed by the right things. So we are taking quite a structured, sort of disciplined approach to lessons learned on East West Rail. Characteristics of the project. It's a route-wide project, so it's a DCO rather than an act. It's a railway project. It's a special purpose vehicle, which is an arm's length body of government. And how, therefore, where should we be looking for those lessons, both in the UK, across industry, and globally, at the right time in the project to learn. So we're taking quite a structured approach to lessons, and in to Simon's point, building that discipline in through our governance and assurance processes to make sure that it is evidenced in that sort of way, rather than kind of I've pulled from with this document or I've spoken to this person, but equally, So I think that's what we're really trying to do at East West Rail, making sure that we're anchoring on innovation as well, which has been tried and tested. And I suppose on the railway, perhaps less innovation in product and more innovation in process to also make sure that we maintain the pace on the project that we want.
And Jas, same questions to you.
So I guess there's a couple of strands to this. So from a governance perspective, we've built into our governance processes that lessons learned are key elements that have to be included in our panel papers when they go to panel to demonstrate not only that we've thought about it, but we've also shared that information. So from a governance perspective, you're not going to get very far unless you've been brutally honest about what worked well and what didn't, and more importantly, what have we put in place to mitigate what didn't work well. So we've got an internal step there. The second one is a bit easier, actually. It's just being really transparent and communicating with your partners, with the supply chain, with other industry bodies, what the challenges were and what and how you've overcome them. Because we have a saying, we call it steal with pride, but it doesn't sound as bad as it is. What we really mean is somebody else has already had that challenge. Somebody else has already kind of cracked that particular nut. And what we do quite a lot in TRU, which I think is really beneficial for us, is when we have major projects, we've got significant requirements, we're very outward looking. We go and engage with others in the industry, not just our supply chain partners, but other individuals and organisations that have had similar challenges. And we collate all of that and we bring that back into the business. And then, more importantly, we don't just create a report and leave it there. We then cascade it in an effective way. So I think we do lots of good work in getting that data. I think we all just need to get a bit better about sharing that data in a really transparent way where the real focus is the improvement, betterment for all, as opposed to we don't really want to, that was a bit awkward. We just need to change that level of engagement.
Nothing new under the sun.
We've all been there.
Exactly. So before we go on to our last question for the panel, it'd be great to have any questions that we have from the audience. Does anyone have any questions for our panel within the audience? Oh, is there a hand there? Brilliant. We'll go here first, then there next.
Hello, my name's Katie. I work for a material supplier. So I was just wondering, from your perspective, do you feel like you can learn anything from other industries that could benefit you in sort of like your role in your companies? So we work across multiple industries. I'm relatively new to my role, but I've been with my company for 4 years, and I've seen a massive difference in comparison to one market to another. And I always feel that when I go to this sort of thing, there's so many things that could benefit a whole market approach. Like if you look at the whole sort of we do aviation, ground transport, coach handbags, a bit of everything. So just wondered what your approach would be or what your thoughts are on it.
Thank you for the question, Katie. So I think that we can all learn an awful lot from the supply chain. I think about some of the things that we're doing in TRU around low carbon concrete and other materials as well. That innovation didn't come from us, it came from the supply chain. So being outward looking and understanding from the supply chain what's happening in your world, what's the innovations you're there, what are you investing in, and how can we structure our procurement events and our requirements to make best advantage of that? Absolutely, we can. It's just that outreach piece really, and making sure we're doing that.
I think it's always tempting, in a procurement you go, and tell us where you've done this for a similar size and scale in the same context. And I think that, again, it comes down to all of those, through that sort of golden thread from vision to, actually what you ask in your procurements, how you structure. It's making sure that that golden thread is there and you don't lose it somewhere. You only have to sort of drop one thing somewhere and you end up cutting off your options. So I think, again, it's that who's involved at the front end. So we're trying to do quite a lot of alliances. We're looking at where does the money go? What are the big numbers in that? How do we lift up some of the kind of tier 2s and 3s that might typically, the comms might have been all through a tier 1, to make sure that you don't lose that sort of innovation and thinking, but also recognise, who does what well, and that's a huge amount of our thinking now around packaging. And our procurement packaging. And so how do you get the checks and balances? How do you get the challenge? Where does it come from? Is something that, again, I think is, this is, procurement shouldn't be transactional. It's got to be far, far broader than that. And the professionals have, in the industry have got to recognise that their role is not transactional. And so, again, it comes down to, all of our roles on projects, and keep screaming and shouting those things, and ask lots of procurement people and others how they do their job.
Amazing, thank you.
Hi, very good morning. Thanks again. My name is David Malcolm. I'm with Optab. We're building agentic cost management solutions. Question to Simon and the rest of the panel. You mentioned innovation and the willingness to fail. Do you have any examples of when that's happened and what kind of innovations you've trialed that's failed or perhaps gone into success?
I think a lot of our projects are delivered out on street. So we're working with the local highway authorities who, understandably, revenue budgets are very tight. There is a nervousness to kind of pilot and trial new products that if they don't have the confidence that the lifecycle cost is going to be sufficiently resilient and is not going to add to their already stretched revenue burden. I think, some of the things like Adept Live Labs you might have heard, which is kind of a grouping across local authorities to actually trial different things that can then be rolled out and scaled across the highway sector. Not all of those Live Lab projects have worked. Some have gone to great things. Some we've been able to kind of adapt and learn from that. I think, I suppose the opportunity there that investment provides at the scale that we're putting in, hopefully it provides a degree of a safety net around that. Whets people's appetite to perhaps be a little bit more ambitious than they might otherwise be if they were delivering a project in isolation. But we do need to be realistic about things that, fundamentally we don't want to add to the maintenance burden that already exists locally. And we need to find the right balance, I suppose, of how we achieve that, working with suppliers and, to the earlier question, how we can learn from other sectors and industries as well, to understand how those transferable knowledge can relate to the industry that we're working in.
Yeah, I mean, look, the tech sector do it really well, don't they? Try, stop, ditch, move on. We're not good at it, and we've got to get better at it. And it comes with a culture of things that have got to be allowed to fail. Carefully pick your pathfinders, and we're looking at. We as East West Rail obviously recognise the wider shift and bringing together of the rail industry and train and track have got are using that sort of starting point of Network Rail. What's worked, what's not worked, where's that benefited productivity, where is it not, where's it created other interfaces and other problems. So that's very much our source of information as a starting point, as well as more sort of global rail type solutions.
So I can't think of one where we've an explicit project where it's failed, but I probably can think of some scenarios. And I think one of the challenges is the work that we're doing in the live environment and the physical environment it's that due diligence piece, isn't it? So quite often we've planned for that particular project, and then when we break ground, there are unforeseen challenges that emerge. Sometimes it's a supply chain piece. We have expected the supply chain to be able to deliver, whether it could be resource or whether it's supplies, and there are other challenges that emerge. What I would say is that a lot of what we're doing is new, so we're kind of finding our way and we're being cautious about that in terms of costings and things. But taking the lessons learned, what's gone before, liaising with others to understand, that's really how we're trying to minimise our risk around that. But it can be unforeseen. And I think the important thing, and the thing that TRU does quite well, is we pivot quite well. So when the writing's on the wall, and you have to be bold about that, it is to decide that we are going to pivot. But what we do is we take our supply chain with us on that discussion as well. So it's a challenge, and I don't think you can ever always plan through for that, but it's one that we face with our supply chain collaboratively.
Brilliant. Well, we've got about 2 minutes before a buzzer goes off in my ear, so I'll have one more question for the panel, and we'll go the same with all of you. Start with you, Jas, but work back this way. If you could make one change, what is the one change you believe would most accelerate sustainable infrastructure in this country?
So I think it'd be just making whole life cost mandatory for when you have procurements and when you're putting your requirements together. That should be a mandatory element that you're putting together, and everyone is thinking about what's that whole life cost from its inception through to the delivery of it, through to usage, and then disposal, I guess.
Sue, you grimaced when I asked that question, sorry.
I mean, I think it's a client being really clear about what they want. I think they need to be able to put that down, 5 bullet points, and be able to communicate it. And I think if we can get that clarity at the front end, you unlock innovation in all of these aspects.
Everyone's life would be easier if the clients were clear, wouldn't it?
That's the golden, if that happens.
That would solve everything. Simon, one from you to wrap up, please.
For me, it's about empowerment. So I think everyone across the industry, everyone in this room has got a role to play in achieving decarbonisation and sustainability outcomes. I think there's a tendency to think, okay, well, we need the skills to do that. But I always reflect on the fact that, we're not all quantity surveyors or we're not all programme planners, but we make decisions around cost and programme every day. So actually empowering people to make decisions around low carbon outcomes, I think, is the key. You just got to make sure you ask the right questions in the first place.
Thank you very much, Simon, Sue and Jas. Really good conversation here today, and thank you all for listening so intently. We're having a small break now in the Pagabo Live Pavilion, but we'll be back at around midday for strategic capital planning. Get my teeth in by then. Thank you very much. See you later.